cheating wife divorced her husband for being poor, then invited him to her wedding. His arrival shocked everyone. Every single day with you feels like punishment, Daniel. I regret the moment I ever said I do. You're not a husband, you're dead weight. Those were the last words Evelyn hurled at her husband before shoving divorce papers into his chest and walking out forever. What happened when she later sent him a wedding invitation dripping with arrogance will make you question everything. You think you know about love, marriage, betrayal, and family. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me ask, have you ever been underestimated by someone who claimed to love you? And what did you do about it? He was sitting in his old apartment checking his bussiness mails, and then it appeared the confirmation email. One simple line that lit up his weary soul. Contract with Ravencrest Technologies. $60 million secured. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He blinked once, twice, making sure it wasn't some cruel hallucination. The deal was done. Months of pitching, negotiating, and clawing through rejection had finally borne fruit. He leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out the storm outside. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different life. No more instant noodles for dinner. No more scraping change to pay the electricity bill. No more patched-up jackets to shield against winter winds. This was their way out. Their second chance at the future he had promised when he'd slipped a cheap silver ring onto Evelyn's finger 5 years ago. Evelyn Cross, his wife. His anchor, or at least she used to be. He pictured the joy on her face when he told her. He imagined her rushing into his arms, crying tears of relief, laughing about how they'd finally made it. He thought of how she used to talk about traveling to Italy, sipping wine in Venice, strolling through Parisian streets. They could finally do it. They could finally live. And just like that, the dream shattered. The front door slammed open with a thunderous crack, rattling the weak hinges. The sound was so violent it drowned out even the storm outside. Daniel's body stiffened. His first instinct was to minimize the screen, to hide the email like a precious jewel he wasn't ready to reveal. He wanted it to be a surprise, a moment of redemption. The sharp staccato of heels clattered against the linoleum, each step striking the floor like a countdown to disaster. Evelyn's arrival was never quiet anymore. She didn't drift into a room. She invaded it. Daniel. His name slipped from her lips like venom, stripped of any affection. He turned slowly, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. But that smile faltered the moment his eyes met hers. Evelyn stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain. Her once flawless makeup was smudged, mascara streaking down her cheeks in uneven trails. The coat she wore was an imitation designer brand she had begged for on credit, now hanging limp and soggy against her frame. But it wasn't her appearance that froze Daniel's heart. It was her expression. Eyes that no longer held the spark of love, only disdain and something darker. Freedom. Her lips twisted into a thin line. We need to talk. Those 4 words landed like a knife in his chest. Daniel rose halfway from his chair. Evelyn, wait. Just hear me out. I don't. She lifted a hand sharply, silencing him with the authority of a judge passing sentence. Just don't. I can't listen to another one of your fairy tale promises. She pulled a thick manila envelope from her bag and dropped it onto the table with a dull thud. Daniel's eyes fell on it, his stomach churning. He didn't need to open it. The heavy silence inside the apartment told him everything. Divorce papers, she announced, her voice flat and merciless. Sign them. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The words refused to process. He had expected anger, maybe an argument, but this was the execution of something sacred. Evelyn, what are you doing? His voice cracked, fragile and pleading. Her laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. What am I doing? I'm saving myself from drowning. I've wasted 5 years waiting for you to become someone, anyone worth standing beside. And what do I have to show for it? She gestured wildly at their cramped apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the dripping faucet. This is your kingdom. This is what I traded my youth for. I can't do it anymore, Daniel's chest constricted. His fingers twitched near the laptop. If she only saw what he had accomplished, and if she only knew. You don't understand, he whispered desperately. I've been working. She spat, her voice rising. Daniel, you've been chasing dreams like a child chasing fireflies. You grab at them, but your hands are always empty. You're not a man, Daniel. You're a boy playing businessman, her. Words sliced deeper than any blade. Then came the fatal blow. There's someone else. Silence fell so thick that even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. Someone else? Evelyn's chin lifted with defiance. Adrian Mercer. He's everything you're not. Successful, powerful, decisive. He doesn't live in fantasy land, Daniel. He owns half the city's real estate. He knows what it means to win. Daniel knew the name. Everyone in the industry knew it. Adrian Mercer, CEO of Mercer Enterprises. A shark who devoured competitors without mercy. How long? Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. 8 months, she said coldly, not even flinching. 8 months, nearly a year of betrayal. All while Daniel worked 18-hour days, building something he thought was for both of them. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. So that's it? You're throwing away everything we built. For him? We didn't build anything, she hissed. You built castles in the air. He builds empires. Daniel's hand hovered over the laptop. One click would show her the Ravencrest deal. One click would unravel every cruel word she had just spoken. But something inside him, pride, exhaustion, or perhaps a thirst to see how far her mask would slip, kept him silent. Evelyn pressed forward, her tone sharp and merciless. He's asked me to marry him. I said yes. He gives me everything you never could. Trips to Paris, first-class flights, diamonds that actually sparkle instead of tarnishing. Do you know what it's like to live, Daniel? Because I do now. The storm outside roared in agreement, slamming sheets of rain against the window. Daniel lowered his gaze to the envelope. His signature would end everything. His pen trembled in his grasp. But in that moment he realized something chilling. Evelyn had already left him long before tonight. With a slow, deliberate motion, he scrawled his name across the papers. Each stroke of ink felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of their marriage. Evelyn snatched the papers away, her face twisted in something that looked like triumph. David's sending movers tomorrow, she said briskly. I'll be gone by morning. Maybe this will finally teach you to grow up. She turned on her heel, pausing at the door just long enough to deliver her final dagger. You're pathetic, Daniel. And you always will be. The door slammed shut. The apartment fell silent. Save for the relentless rain and the jagged rhythm of Daniel's breathing. He sat there for a long time, staring at the laptop screen still glowing faintly on the table. The confirmation email pulsed like a cruel joke. $60 million secured. His triumph came too late, or perhaps it had arrived right on time, a weapon forged in silence waiting for the day he would need it most. Daniel closed the laptop with trembling hands. Tonight, he was just another broken man in a crumbling apartment. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the weight of betrayal, something stirred. A storm was brewing. And next time it would not be outside his window, it would be inside him. Write down in the comments from where are you watching the video, and also tell us, are you enjoying it? They say time heals all wounds. But what if time doesn't heal? What if it sharpens the memory of every betrayal, every cruel word, every broken promise? Until those wounds aren't scars but weapons. Tonight's story isn't just about success. It's about transformation. 1 year had passed since Evelyn Cross stormed out of that crumbling apartment, leaving divorce papers behind like a battlefield victory. She thought she'd buried Daniel Cross, the poor dreamer, the failed husband, the man she called pathetic. But what she never knew was that Daniel wasn't buried at all. He was reborn. Daniel's name first appeared quietly in the business columns of minor newspapers. Tech innovator secures breakthrough deal. The Ravencrest Technologies partnership, worth $60 million, hadn't just saved him. It launched him. Within 6 months, his software platform had exploded into the market. By the time Evelyn was posting pictures from Paris with Adrian Mercer, Daniel was rewriting the very rules of the industry. Hollow-eyed journalists who once ignored his emails now begged for interviews. Financial magazines printed his name alongside words like visionary and revolutionary. Television anchors introduced him with reverence. Daniel Cross, the man who disrupted an empire. And disrupt he did. Mercer Enterprises, Adrian's pride and joy, one began to stumble. Daniel's product undercut their services, offering faster, sleeker, cheaper solutions. Tech blogs buzzed with comparisons, always favoring the underdog who had once lived in a shoebox apartment. Adrian, who had laughed in Daniel's shadow, was suddenly playing defense. But Daniel didn't stop there. He reinvested every dollar into expansion. Ravencrest wasn't a victory lap. It was just the first stone in his foundation. He acquired small startups, hired brilliant minds, and built his own company, Cross Innovations, into a juggernaut. By the year's end, his personal net worth had crossed $200 million. He no longer lived in that rain-soaked apartment. Instead, he woke each morning in a penthouse that kissed the clouds, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The same city that once mocked him now glittered at his feet like a conquered kingdom. Yet, despite all the luxury, the tailored suits, the private jet, the invitations to elite galas, Daniel never forgot the night Evelyn walked away. Her words still burned. "You're pathetic. You always will be." Those words weren't scars. They were fuel. Daniel Cross was no longer the hollow-eyed man begging for approval. He carried himself differently now. His shoulders straightened with quiet authority. His gaze no longer darted nervously but held steady, sharp, assessing. He spoke less, but when he did, rooms fell silent. Assistants scrambled to please him, investors begged for meetings, and competitors cursed his name behind closed doors. But Daniel didn't care. His life wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It was about becoming the man he always knew he could be, the man Evelyn never believed existed. And yet a part of him waited for the moment their worlds would collide again. That moment arrived one ordinary Thursday afternoon. Daniel sat in his office, a sprawling masterpiece of glass and mahogany on the top floor of Cross Tower, the skyscraper that now bore his name. Contracts lay spread across his desk, each one worth more than the entire block of apartments where he once lived. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Lila, entered with a small envelope in her hand. "This just came in for you, sir," she said, placing it gently before him. Daniel glanced at it absently, cream-colored, embossed with gold. Elegant, pretentious, the kind of stationery used only for the most self-important events. He slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the card. His eyes fell on the words, "Evelyn Cross and Adrian Mercer request the honor of your presence at their wedding." Daniel's hand stilled. For a long moment, the office seemed to vanish around him. He could almost hear her voice again. "You're pathetic. You'll never amount to anything." But tucked inside the envelope was something worse than the formal invitation, a handwritten note in Evelyn's unmistakable cursive. "No hard feelings, Daniel. Come see what a real wedding looks like. Maybe you'll finally learn what success means." Daniel let out a slow breath, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a growl. She had no idea. Lila, watching from across the desk, shifted nervously. "Is everything all right, sir?" Daniel closed the card with deliberate calm. "Perfectly fine. Prepare the calendar for Saturday. I have a wedding to attend." Evelyn's arrogance was nothing new. But what she didn't know was that Daniel had been preparing for this moment long before her note ever arrived. For months, his lawyers had been quietly buying stock in Mercer Enterprises. Piece by piece, share by share, he had built control. By the time Evelyn walked down the aisle, Daniel would own 30% of Adrian's company. It wasn't just business. It was poetic justice. Adrian had stolen his wife with wealth and power, and now Daniel would dismantle his empire with the very tools Adrian once flaunted. The irony was delicious. Evelyn wanted a man who could provide diamonds and luxury. She left Daniel for someone she thought was powerful. But at the altar, as photographers flashed and guests applauded, she would discover the truth. The man she abandoned had become the very king she craved, and he no longer needed her. The Grand Celestia Cathedral gleamed under the afternoon sun, its marble steps polished to perfection. Society's elite filled the pews, their jewels glittering beneath the stained glass light. A chamber orchestra tuned their instruments, preparing to play the march of triumph Evelyn had dreamed of since childhood. Adrian stood at the altar, smug in his custom tuxedo, his hair slicked to perfection. The board of Mercer Enterprises occupied the front rows, their presence doubling as witnesses to both a wedding and a merger of wealth. Evelyn, in the bridal suite, twirled before a mirror in a gown that cost more than Daniel's old apartment had been worth. Silk cascaded around her like a waterfall. Jewels sparkled in her hair. She smiled at her reflection, imagining the gasps of envy from the guests. Today was her day of victory, her moment to flaunt her escape from Daniel's failure. But outside something stirred. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the cathedral steps. The first door opened and men in dark suits stepped out with military precision. They scanned the crowd, spoke into earpieces, and took their positions. The second SUV disgorged more guards, their movements crisp and rehearsed. Guests craned their necks. Is it a foreign diplomat? A celebrity? Phones lifted into the air, recording every moment. Then the third SUV opened. Daniel Cross stepped out. Gone was the man Evelyn once mocked. In his place stood a figure carved from power itself. His tailored charcoal suit fit like armor. His Italian leather shoes gleamed with quiet authority. A platinum watch winked in the sunlight, but it wasn't the accessories that drew the gasps. It was him, his presence. He walked forward with measured steps, his security detail moving in perfect sync around him. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers rising like waves. Camera flashes erupted. Inside the cathedral, the whispers reached the altar. Adrian leaned toward the wedding coordinator. What's happening? The coordinator whispered urgently, her eyes wide. Someone important just arrived. Daniel Cross. Adrian froze. His confident smile faltered for the first time. Daniel signed the guest book with the same Mont Blanc pen he'd used to close billion-dollar contracts. His signature was steady, deliberate, final. The master of ceremonies, now aware of the name, cleared his throat nervously and announced to the entire congregation, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished guest, Mr. Daniel Cross, Chief Executive Officer of Cross Innovations." The cathedral fell silent. Every head turned. Every gaze locked on him. And in the bridal suite, Evelyn's hand slipped from her bouquet. She rushed to the window, peering out with disbelief. There he was, the man she had left behind. But he was unrecognizable. Not the struggling husband in a fraying jacket. Not the dreamer hunched over a laptop. No, this was someone else. Someone powerful. Someone untouchable. Her heart raced. "No, this isn't possible," she whispered. Guests flocked to him. Board members bowed slightly in respect. Photographers snapped furiously. Society matrons whispered his name like it was holy, and Evelyn, the bride, suddenly felt like a spectator at her own wedding. That day, the ceremony went on, but not as she planned. Adrian's vows stumbled, his eyes flickering toward Daniel with unease. Evelyn's voice shook when she spoke, each word laced with doubt. The fairy tale she had built began to crumble before her very eyes, because this wasn't her victory anymore. It was Daniel's stage. They say every empire is built on two foundations, love and power. But when love rots into betrayal, and power rises from ruin, what happens when the betrayer comes face to face with the king she once dismissed as worthless? Tonight's story isn't about forgiveness. It's about reckoning. About how a single choice, a cruel word, a selfish departure, can come back like a storm, destroying everything in its path. The day of Evelyn's wedding was supposed to be her final triumph. Cameras flashed, society applauded, and Adrian Mercer, wealthy, smug, confident, then stood beside her at the altar. But she hadn't counted on him. On Daniel Cross, the man she had mocked, abandoned, and erased from her future. He wasn't the same Daniel she had left in that broken apartment. He was power personified, and from the moment he entered the cathedral, the story no longer belonged to her, the ceremony that wasn't hers anymore. The minister's voice echoed off the cathedral walls, but half the guests weren't listening. Their eyes tracked Daniel, sitting in the second pew, surrounded by men in black suits with earpieces. His presence filled the room like a shadow stretching across sunlight. Adrian tried to ignore it. His jaw clenched as he squeezed Evelyn's hand, whispering through gritted teeth, "Focus, don't look at him." But Evelyn couldn't. Her eyes betrayed her, darting toward Daniel again and again. Each time she looked, she saw not the broken man she'd left, but the stranger she couldn't comprehend. His eyes were cold, detached, unreadable. Yet behind them was something she couldn't escape. Power. Her vows caught in her throat. Words rehearsed for weeks sounded brittle, hollow. The guests noticed. Whispers rippled through the pews. When the minister asked Adrian to recite his vows, his once confident voice cracked. I promise," he began, but his gaze flickered to Daniel. For the first time in his charmed life, Adrian Mercer looked afraid. And Daniel? He didn't move, didn't speak. He only watched, an immovable force, as if the entire wedding were nothing more than theater staged for his amusement. After the vows stumbled to their awkward conclusion, the reception began in the cathedral's grand hall. Chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, and music played, but the energy had shifted. Guests gravitated toward Daniel, not the bride and groom. Investors whispered with him. Socialites angled for his attention. Journalists scribbled his every word. Adrian clenched his fist around a glass of champagne, muttering, "He's hijacking our wedding. Evelyn," her smile plastered on with effort, finally snapped. "What the hell is he even doing here? He was supposed to be a nobody." Adrian turned on her, his voice low and harsh. "A nobody? Evelyn? He's the man who's been tearing my company apart for months. That nobody owns a third of Mercer Enterprises." Her blood ran cold. What did you just say?" Adrian's glare was poisonous. "You knew him better than anyone. Did you really not see this coming?" But Evelyn had seen nothing. In her arrogance, she had assumed Daniel would fade into obscurity, a sad footnote in her glamorous life. Instead, here he was, wealthier, more powerful, more desired than either of them. And worse, he wasn't gloating. He wasn't flaunting it. He was simply existing, and it was enough to unravel their carefully crafted fantasy. It happened near the marble staircase, away from the main crowd. Evelyn couldn't stop herself. She had to know. She approached Daniel, her heels clicking nervously against the floor. Her wedding dress heavy as chains. He turned as she neared, his gaze sharp but calm, like he'd been expecting her. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a faint, ironic smile. "Mrs. Mercer, congratulations." The title stung like a slap. Don't call me that." "Why not?" he asked smoothly. "Isn't this everything you wanted? Wealth, power, a man who could give you the world." His eyes flicked toward Adrian across the hall. "Although I'm not sure you picked the right man." Her throat tightened. "You've changed." "No," Daniel said quietly, his tone like steel. "I just became who I was always meant to be." "You never saw it, Evelyn. You were too busy looking for shortcuts to climb ladders that didn't belong to you." Her eyes glistened. I thought you'd fail." "I did," he admitted, "and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just truth, and that truth broke her more than fury ever could. Adrian saw them speaking, saw Evelyn's trembling posture, and fury consumed him. He stormed over, shoving aside anyone in his path. "Enough," he hissed, grabbing Evelyn's arm. He glared at Daniel. "You think you can walk into my wedding and steal the spotlight? You've made your point, Cross. Leave." Daniel didn't rise to the bait. He simply looked at Adrian with cool detachment. "This isn't your wedding, Mercer. It never was. You built this entire performance to prove something. To her, to me, to the world. But you've already lost." Adrian's face reddened. "Lost? I married her. She chose me." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile. "She didn't choose you. She chose the illusion of power. And illusions don't last." Evelyn's eyes darted between them, panic spreading across her face. The two men weren't just arguing. They were exposing truths she had buried deep. Truths she didn't want the world to hear. Word spread quickly among the guests. Whispers turned into rumors, rumors into scandal. By the end of the night, society wasn't talking about Evelyn's dress or Adrian's wealth. They were talking about Daniel Cross, the man who had walked into his ex-wife's wedding and walked out with her world in shambles. Within weeks, Mercer Enterprises' stock plummeted. Investors fled, fearing Daniel's dominance. Adrian scrambled to salvage his empire, but every move he made, Daniel countered effortlessly. It wasn't personal anymore. It was business. And in business, Daniel was ruthless. Adrian's board ousted him within 3 months. Evelyn, once the queen of his empire, found herself married to a man stripped of power, status, and wealth. The lavish penthouse, the designer gowns, the endless champagne, all gone. And Daniel? He didn't lift a finger against her directly. He didn't need to. Her downfall was simply a consequence of her own choices. It was almost poetic when Evelyn showed up at Daniel's office one rainy evening. Soaked and trembling, no jewels, no luxury, and just desperation. He looked up from his desk, the city lights glittering behind him like stars bowing to their king. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I made a mistake. I see that now. I left the wrong man. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Did you? Or did you simply reveal who you really were? Her tears fell freely. I was foolish, blind, I wanted more than love. But now I see. You are more. You're everything. Please, Daniel, give me another chance. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel stood, walking slowly toward her. For a heartbeat, she thought he might embrace her, forgive her, take her back. But he stopped just inches away, his voice low, final, unshakable. You left me when I was nothing. Now that I am everything, I don't need you. And with that, he turned his back, returning to his desk. Evelyn crumpled to the floor, sobbing, not just for the man she lost, but for the empire she could never touch again. Daniel Cross didn't celebrate her downfall. He didn't post pictures, didn't gloat, didn't waste energy on revenge. He simply moved forward. His company grew into a global titan, his influence reshaping industries. And as for Evelyn, she became a whispered cautionary tale at every gala, every business dinner, every glittering party. The woman who had traded love for greed only to lose both. Daniel's name, however, became legend, not because of wealth alone, but because he had faced betrayal and turned it into fire. Fire that didn't consume him but forged him into something greater. In the end, she was right about one thing. He wasn't the man she married. He was so much more, and that was her true punishment. If you were Daniel, will you give her a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.